Alright, what's up, y'all? I know this is quite the angle to show this, but there's a reason for it, and this will be good. Today is the 12th of June, 2026. My name is Evan Strong, the founder of the Image Clothing Company, but I'm going to be up here for the video, okay? For the visual of the hip, because that's going to be the title of this video, is the visual example of the hip moving at the side seam of the pants, okay? Visual example of hips moving at the side seams of the pants. We are in the Image Clothing Company. Allowing the body to work is our slogan here on our main side, one of our four, that's to us, right? And the thing is, we talk about where clothing sits for every body who has one, everyone who has a body, right? This universal human design. It's always the same baseline, okay? We get into it in depth, though, but here's the thing. Clothing just being the only thing physically placed on us, right? And yeah, that could be anything: hats, pants, gloves, tops, pants. I think I said pants twice. Undergarments, socks, gloves, jewelry. If I said gloves twice, then cool. The point is, whatever you place on the body, it's the literal word of clothing. And we talk about, you know, the side seams of pants having to be right at the very sides of the hips, where you've got the hip crest coming to the peak of the crest, right where the very side of the seam of the pant is, and then the upper leg bone, the femur, coming up and then connecting into what's called the acetabulum of this part of the hip down here. There's a ball at the top of the upper leg bone meeting into a socket of the hip, which is a ball and socket joint like this, okay? And the leg can move in the socket of the hip, okay? But this is just a short, quick little video to show this. I was just sitting here actually getting ready to film other videos under In The Image Clothing Company's 5-word company name. And I was just like moving my hip, and I noticed this is a really good angle to show this in. A really good angle to see it in. Where if you don't have the side seam of your pants right at the very sides of your hips, then all of this motion you can see here, like all the way from here out to, you know, well, we could go straight, or just all the rotations that are happening, external or internal rotation in the whole leg coming up into the hip. The pants have their own seams. You know, we talk about joints of material of clothing meshing with joints of body parts, like at the edges of the shoulder. You know, that's a big point, a good way to see that, a good area to see it in. But this visual right here, right, seriously, for the sake of the visual of what's happening, there's just so much motion right here in the hip. I mean, your leg, there's a lot of motion happening, right? Flexion, extension, abduction, adduction, internal rotation, external rotation, and you can see it's all pivoting from right here at the very side, from front to back at the very side of the body. And then, yeah, I mean, just, there needs to be this area where the seam of the pants will just be right at the very side of the body. Otherwise, it won't be able to have the hips fully move, because if the pant side seams are more in toward the front, you'll be internally rotated at the upper leg bones, okay? It'll just pull the upper leg internal all the way down to the foot, okay? If the pant side seams come farther back, really that just opens the legs more, and that's actually not necessarily a problem so much, okay? I mean, really though, the goal is, and we almost have to have them right at the very sides of the body. If anything, slightly farther back, because like I'm saying, then you open up the pelvis and you can really keep your core activated and more neutral. But if you close off the legs, you deactivate your core because of just the shape of how the upper leg bone comes up and then it comes in toward the center line of the body when it meets into the hips. And so in order for the legs to open, well, they need to come out, essentially back, if you will, okay? So a lot of pant designs, you know, well, we talk about it. A lot of free modifications in clothing we give under In The Image Clothing Company. But it's common, at least as of 2026, to have pant designs where the side seams of the pants just are too far forward from the sides of the hips, and that changes just how the crest of the hips work. And it changes your feet too. Your feet will pronate, collapse down and out into external rotation with the arches. If you can't open your legs at the top of them, at the hips, hey Dante, because let's say the pant side seam comes in and it just changes the whole body, and not just down to the toes, but up to the tip of the head, through the jaw, stabilizing the entire body, out to the tips of the fingers. The whole body will be damaged, okay? Remember, there's that neutral position in all the ways. Abduction, adduction, flexion, extension, internal rotation, external rotation. The pelvis, posterior or anterior, there's always a neutral, and this is all happening where the upper leg bone comes in and joins into the hip, and that's where this seam of the pants is. So this is just the visual, because this is a good angle. Meaning sitting down like this, my legs are, there's an angle, there's a bend in my hips where you can actually see the bending of the seam of the pants with the bending of my leg as I extend my leg or bend it right at the hips, or the rotations as well, right? You can see as I internally rotate my leg, the seam comes in toward the center of my body more, and as I externally rotate my leg, the seam comes out. But we've got to remember the shape of the upper leg bone, so it's not necessarily that you'll just be going into internal rotation if the seam comes forward, or into external rotation if it goes backward, because there's a lot more happening mechanically from the foot all the way up to the hip, and then the pelvis's position, and just the shape of the bones of the leg as well, and the way that the leg has this outward curvature through the ankle, the 5 different length toes we roll evenly off the ends of. There's a lot happening mechanically to where actually when the seam comes back more, it opens the hip, and now that is actually more internally rotated because of the way the feet grip arches. When the feet grip in and internally rotate, it actually opens the hips like this, right? That's actually internal rotation when my legs come out. Seen with context, but that's a lot of it there. I mean, that's a lot of the explanation you'd need to understand that. You can probably hear Dante's breathing, but it is what it is. In the Image Clothing Company, blunt, bold, raw, and real. Anyway, like I said, it's the 12th of June, 2026. There's a good documentation of the visual of that. We talk about just where clothing sits. We get into it in depth. A lot of free modifications in clothing, allowing the body to work. Clothing's just the literal word of anything physically placed on our bodies. But there's the visual example of just the seam meeting right at the edge of the hip. There's an edge, like protrusion of the very side of the hip, and it matches up with the very crest of the top of the hip, and then it matches up with the very outside of the leg as well. So that's where the side seam of the pants needs to be. Okay, and then all the motion just happens right there. Okay, the motion of the bones of the body is happening right at the very same location as the side seams of the pants. So a lot of free modifications, need to be done where they do in clothing. Check out our 5-word company name, In the Image Clothing Company, wherever you can find us for information. Okay. Thank you. Goodbye.